So our theme verse for the year is from 1 Timothy 1:15. The saying is trustworthy and deserving of full acceptance, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the foremost.
Excuse me, get this on. Talk a little bit about, though, the greatest gifts, because that's actually the verse we just read talks about an even better way than the gifts, the miraculous gifts that God had given to many people in the church in the first century. Faith, hope, and love are really the greatest gifts God gives. And I don't know that we always grasp how much better they are than doing miracles. I mean, I think many of us have probably read through the scriptures and read the stories of when Jesus or his apostles healed somebody born lame or born blind, and immediately they could see or they could walk, and just the power that moment would have had. It just seems like, well, what a tremendous power that is. But that power, that gift that God had given for people to do that, he says, isn't as good as faith and hope and love. That those are greater things, that they are better things. They rank higher than the ability to heal people. And I think we don't grasp sometimes what a benefit and what a blessing we have to have faith. And so I want to talk a little bit about my observations from the land of Hogwarts and Mickey. So as many know, we spent some time in Florida, went to Universal Studios, went to Disney World, and I'm a people watcher. I guess all my life been kind of an observer more. A lot of times I like watching and observing things more than I actually do participating sometimes. Because I'm really interested, and I don't know if the rest of you do this, like in certain movies or plays, when the central action is happening, I stare at the faces of others in the cast and character to see how they're reacting. I don't know if everybody else does that or not, but I'm always interested in how people are acting or reacting to situations. And so the other thing, I go to these places in part for my family, because I actually really don't like crowds. And they can tell you that when it is packed and like sardines in there, these parks, that I'm like weaving my way through as fast as possible to get someplace where it's a little more open. But there's a few things that really hit me and about these topics of faith, hope, and love, about just watching people in these lands and in these places. There are places of fantasy, of fairy tale. People have written stories that people are engrossed in and caught up in and imagine themselves in all the time. And so, for the Potterheads out there that they call themselves, who are all caught up into J.K. Rowling's stories, or for the Disney fans out there that, still are enamored with Walt and his imagination and the joy that those things can bring. And I'm actually not going to focus on the tears and the anger and for the happiest place on earth, especially, to see so much, angst and difficulty and tears and anger, and that's not even talking about the kids yet. So but I think it's a really good example, in fact, of if you were to say it, let's just kind of just for the sake of argument, that it is the happiest place on earth, going to Disneyland or Disney World, there's still an awful lot of aggravation. There's an awful lot of difficulties, especially when kids are little and struggling through, and it's hot and it's crowded, and but see, that's what earth is. We don't get heaven here. Heaven is a place without those things. It is all the joy, all the blessings, without the downside. There are no tears in heaven. All the other stuff has gone away. But on earth, the best we can do is have moments of happiness and joy, but we're going to have various trials while we are on this earth. We are going to have those moments of difficulty and anger and tears and such. And so as I observed, though, walking around, and it isn't just walking, it's reading too, just my observations of what these stories mean. Profound, anyway, to me that seems like, just really just basically profound things. And I think what I observed is everybody wants three things. Everybody wants these three things. They want to believe in something. In Disney World, how many things you can buy with the big letters believe in magic is like hard to count. Everybody wants to believe in something. In fact, I was even driving in this day, I was reminded of, I'd written down a whole bunch of different kinds of people yesterday who want to believe in things. And I saw one of those little fish symbols, sort of, on the back of a car, only instead of the fish symbol, it also had science inside of it with a couple of extra little things to make it a rocket. And I'm thinking, so why does a person who doesn't really believe in God do that? Because they believe in science. It's what they believe in. I know I used to be that kind of person. I understand that, and that they also have a hope. But you know what? That person who doesn't believe in God, what is their hope? Evolution is their hope, because the hope is everything is always getting better. That is the theory behind the concept of evolution on a big macro scale for a person who believes in science. And so they're always looking forward that it's going to be better. And so I was caught by, as I was reading, a quote by J.J. Abrams, who is doing some of the new Star Wars movies. Star Wars isn't a movie, it's a religion, he said. But this religion people have, they don't always know how fungible these things are. Now, I don't know if J.J. Abrams is just making a commentary about how people caught up into the cult of Star Wars have turned it into a belief system rather than simply a story of fantasy. And I don't know if he thinks it's something more or not. So I'm not sure the context of his quote. But I think he's true. I think there are people out there who actually use things said in Star Wars or Star Trek and build life principles around them. Why? Because people want to believe in things. They need, I think people at a very basic level need to believe in something beyond themselves. Because I think what happens is if all we do is believe in ourselves, well, we become as self-centered and we find it fairly shallow and hollow. And so I think everybody seeks to be part of something bigger. I think that's universal. Because when I sat there and looked around inside Universal Studios or Disney World, and I watched people kind of get caught up in the imagination and the magic of certain stories, they came from every walk of life. I mean, you got guys, bikers, and and their little kids, and you have every type of person, at least in American society, walking around there, and from every religion. And essentially especially Disney World, you really do. It's amazing, actually, Julie and I actually commented on it, how many languages you hear being spoken walking around there. And you're just kind of, I wonder which language that is. And some of them you can't recognize, especially, like certain Scandinavian languages, or maybe hard to kind of pick out. But there's a lot of language. It's kind of amazing. But everybody wants to believe in something. I really think they do. And I think these things point at that the people want to get caught up in this. And that kind of leads to the second thing, hope. When you wish upon a star, makes no difference who you are, anything your heart desires will come to you. Now, I don't know if that's a quote from Walt Disney or the Walt Disney Company. when you find it, most places it says Walt Disney Company is the author. They own the rights to the quote anyway, to put it on stuff. So I don't really know how much Walt actually said and how much just kind of gets put on as his stuff. But he was a man who liked imagination, who liked to think about these fantasies and to kind of go in places that made people feel good. But the concept about wishing upon a star, that is found in so many of their stories that are universally loved and adored. The idea that you can wish and get what you wish for, that's kind of what the world all wants. We want to be able to have hope. Because what's the opposite of having if you don't have hope in something? If there's no possible hope in the future, then we get discouraged, don't we? And people can get discouraged when they see no hope. They can get discouraged to the point that they feel like life is actually not even worth it. And you go, that's kind of amazing. But what happens to people of even, was it just a year or two ago that Robin Williams killed himself? You say, well, Robin Williams had probably more money than most of us could imagine, has done more things, has been involved in more even Disney stuff. And yet something, whether, I don't know if it was just a mental disease or if actually a loss of hope and discouragement, a complete, discouragement had set in, or drugs or whatever else was involved, but he had gotten to that point, I think, had no hope. And that's why I think everybody desires it. I think everybody wants something to wish for / hope for. Now we know God's hope is not wishes. God's hope is much more sure than that. But everybody desires something, a hope to look forward to. And I think everybody desires love and to be loved. In whatever way, in a different, and that I think takes a number of different shapes and forms in the different world and different people's points of view and the principles that they carry with them. But I think everybody desires love and to be loved. Not necessarily by everybody, but by somebody. And I think you see that in what people, do and are attracted to. And I'll give you the one quote that Potterheads don't need to have it explained. But for those who aren't Potterheads, Severus Snape kind of seems like an evil guy through most of the story. I guess I'll give it away now, the whole ending. So this guy who seems like a really evil guy through the whole story doesn't really like Harry Potter, but in the end we find out he has been helping him behind the scenes the whole time. And it isn't really because of Harry, and it's certainly not because of the guy he resembles, his father, because he hated his father, and his father had been a bully to him, because Severus had been one of those kind of children who was different and picked on, but it was because of his mother. And he always is a reference to how Dumbledore says to him, even to this day, and he's referring to him loving her, and he says always. And that concept of love is actually woven through the entire story of J.K. Rowling, from beginning to end. That's in a really a really great way, in a pretty subtle way. But I think it shows, and I think that the attraction everybody has to these things shows how much people desire this concept, to have somebody love them and to love somebody else. I think that's universal. And I think it's also how odd it is that God's greatest gifts essentially fit these three things. That's what really struck me as I kind of watched around and looked at people who love it. And we really like, the fantasy of Disney and the immerse of the stories and the whole environment of it. But I leave it and I come back home and I still have all of that, but better. But I think for many people in the world who kind of want those things, they're searching and they go looking for, wishing upon a star and having, believing in magic, and to them, that's all they really have. But they don't have those things because I think in the back of their mind, they all know that this really is just a fantasy. It's not real. And the great thing about God is this is real to us. This isn't a fantasy. And so the idea of believing in something bigger than ourselves helps. It's a blessing for us to have that belief and that faith. And so all through chapter 12, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and this is just the last verse of the chapter, but Paul has been writing about the church in Corinth has been treating gifts like, hey, I've got a better gift than you've got. And everybody is kind of picking and choosing what they think are the better gifts. My sneakers or my shoes are cooler than your shoes. And I mean, that's kind of what they're all doing. Pride kind of coming in and getting caught up. And he has to teach them about, listen, the Spirit gives out gifts the way He wishes for the benefit of everybody. But really, he says he's taking some time here, and chapter 13 is really kind of a sidebar from 12 and 14 to show, listen, there's something even better than all of these gifts. And what it is, he goes, you should desire the higher gifts or the better gifts or the best, kind of the higher ranked is probably what's being referred to here in the ESV. And he says, but I'm going to show you a way that surpasses all of these gifts. And he comes to love, and he says, and so he goes through all the gifts and things, but he says, but faith, hope, and love abide. So the gifts are all temporary, but he says these three abide. They remain. They continue. And the greatest is love. And so he helps us understand that even we're talking about the best three, they're still the top one. And so God's greatest gifts, is it really a coincidence that God is the only one who can provide the three things I think everybody wants? I don't think that's a coincidence. God made us. He knows us. He created us in His own image. And He knows exactly what we need to be fulfilled. But often, as you go through Romans 1, and we see that man has often not wanted what God is giving, because man keeps wanting to invent it himself. And I think that's what you see actually in Disney and in Rowling stories, is you see people inventing stories around the same concepts, and people are so caught up with them. Why aren't they caught up with the real things God offers? Because I don't want the real God. Because the problem of the real thing God offers, I can go to Disney and I can go to, Harry Potter, and there's no judgment. I don't have to change. I don't have to do anything different. I can just, God says, I need you to grow up. I want you to grow and be better and become more like me. And with God, there is expectation that man often doesn't want. And so we throw off God and all of His gifts because it comes with a challenge. Just like when Jesus said, after multitudes and multitudes were following Him, He turned and, he made most of them go away when He says, you can't follow me unless you love me more than your own family and your own life. You can't follow me. You can't be my disciple. Now, lots of people stopped following him at that point because that was too hard. And that's the challenge. With these gifts also comes a challenge for us to put him first. And that's the difficulty, is it can we put ourselves second or aside for him primarily? Is the work of God, by the way. As he tells us in John chapter 6, verse 28, 29, they said to him, "What must we do to be doing the works of God?" Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." So when I talk about gifts, now, in many ways in 1 Corinthians 13, he's talking about faith, hope, and love, not even as gifts, but as a really a better way than these miraculous gifts they were being given by the Holy Spirit. But they really are still gifts of God. We don't have faith because of us. We don't get it ourselves. Faith comes because of what God has done, not of what we have done. God is the one who gives the ability for us to have faith. He is the one who delivers the word to teach us. He is the one who helps us. He is the one who has been working from the very beginning that we might believe him and believe whom he sent. In 1 John 3:23, when he gave this commandment that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, what was that commandment based on? When he said, you need to do this, he had given proof that this was the Christ, the Messiah. How had he done that? Well, for 1,500 years or more, he had been giving us prophecies of this Christ. He had been foretelling this one who would come, whom we would believe in. He gave us all that we needed to go, this isn't something some human created. You ever read those stories that when you go through the checkout lines in a grocery store, I don't know, Star and the other, Inquirer, whatever the papers are, that every year, end of the year, they have all the predictions for next year. And a bunch of people, they almost always say, 96% or 98% accurate. And all they're doing is predicting the next year. They can't get it all. And actually, if you and I to put out a whole bunch of predictions, and if we were to do 90+% of our predictions being accurate for next year, that would actually be pretty good. But God predicted things thousands of years ahead of time in cultures that had not existed, in ways that people killed them that didn't exist yet. And he predicted all of that. I mean, to be predicting him hanging upon a tree, that kind of death, when God originally had predicted it, wasn't even done that way. And so God has been giving us everything we need to believe. To believe in something that is real. It's not fantasy. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, faith is the assurance of things hoped for. How can we be sure of things that we hope for? Why am I sure Jesus is alive? Well, I'm sure Jesus is alive because I believe the witnesses who saw him before he died, saw him when he died, and saw him risen from the dead. I believe those witnesses because of what they went through and because of their testimony, and their testimony cost them. To me, those are great witnesses. Most lawyers would kill to have 12 witnesses of that character on the stand for their side. And that's what we have for Christ. And so I'm assured of those things. That is a great blessing. When people sit and wish upon a star for a blue fairy to show up and give me something my heart desires, that's just a fantasy in my head. This is something far greater than that. And He's promising me things I can't even yet relate to. He is promising me things that I can't even understand how wonderful they are. But I'm assured of them because of the work He has done for me. A living hope. And I think Peter really does a great job here in chapter 1 talking about it. Writing to us, "Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. According to His great mercy, He has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead." That's why we have such hope. Because He was killed, but He is not buried. He was in a tomb for a few days, but He came out. And that fact, by the way, is critical to our hope and our faith. And it's also the one thing that critics can't go, "You're so wrong, here's the grave." You know, when Peter first started preaching in Acts 2, he said, "We have David's grave." They knew right where David was buried. Nobody knew where Jesus' body was. There is no grave. And it's been testified, even by people who are not believers, and that this guy, this body, was no longer in the tomb. And so the fact that He is resurrected from the dead is what gives power to our hope. And promises to an inheritance that is imperishable, undefiled, unfading, kept in heaven for you. Now I want to think about that. Let's say you were going to be given a great inheritance by some family member. I mean, just massive, no matter how much money, no matter how much goods, no matter how much it is it imperishable? Can money not perish? We'll go to Zimbabwe where, they have like 1,000 or 10,000% inflation rate. So you have like $10,000 one day, a few minutes later it's worth, pennies. Money is, the paper is worth more than the value of the money in Zimbabwe. Money can become perishable. It can become worthless. Even land and even the things, even gold, God has told us, is going to fade away. Yet He has promised us something that's greater than even gold. And we think of things that are like diamonds, gold, precious gems. We think, well, nothing can ever stop them. They're always going to be precious. And yet He's telling us those are all going to go away because those are just made of stuff God made. But He's promising us things that are greater than gold and precious jewels. Won't ever become defiled, won't ever fade away. And He says it's kept in heaven for you. Our inheritance isn't here. Our promise isn't here. That's why we have to keep our mind focused and our hearts looking forward to that. And He says, who by God's power are being guarded through faith. So that faith, do we even think about faith in that way? That faith is actually something that helps guard us and protect us? We probably don't realize it sometimes, that our faith, how important it is to really our own protection before God. And God is doing that for a salvation ready to be revealed in the last time. Now, I think a lot of us, we talk about, there's two ways, even scriptures do this too. We talk about being saved and yet not quite fully saved, right? Because we don't fully have it yet. Actually, the book of Hebrews talks about it the same way. That yes, we have got salvation and yet we don't actually see it yet. It's yet to be revealed before us. And that's what he's talking about here as well, that we're ready for that salvation. We're ready for that end result. He says, in this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials. That's the worldly. That last verse kind of to help really summed up is a verse I thought of as I watched people having fun and, just in loving, looking at all the faces. I love watching the faces of people watching the fireworks. Look at the fireworks, but then I love watching faces of people, and especially little kids, and they're so excited watching fireworks going off, and and it's just, to me, that's I like that. And yet that in a little while they're probably also going to be screaming and crying because they're too tired. But that's what life in the world is like, isn't it? There are moments of beauty and blessing, and there are moments of grievous trials. That's what life in the world is like. But that's not what life in heaven is like. We put off the grievous trials. For a little while, these grievous trials are somewhat necessary. But they're not there. So our hope and what we're looking forward to is not just some good version of worldly stuff. We're looking for something that's better than anything this world has in it. And understand, the first 3 verses of chapter 13, Paul really talks about how we can do a lot of really great things, but if we don't have love, there is no benefit to us. He says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I become sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. And I think sometimes we do get a little too worried or concerned about the things we do or don't do, and forget that the motivation behind the things we do and don't do is as important or more so. We need to be motivated by love. We need primary, to love God and love our neighbor. That's why Jesus said every law in the Old Testament was based upon those 2 laws, to love God and love your neighbor. Everything that we do in religion, and I think this goes back to where J.J. Abrams and much of the world really don't grasp what God's religion is. God's religion, by the way, is a word that means what we do for God. It's what we do because we love God. So what is your religion? It isn't some organization you show up to. Your religion is what you do for God. And you're only going to do those things if you truly love God. And what he's asking you to do is truly love others, to serve other people, to love other people. Because then you will see a profit. You will see a benefit of following him if you truly love. Those are the greatest gifts we have. And yet I think we take them for granted sometimes, It's sometimes when we realize what we can't have is how much we realize how important something was. And sometimes when we have something in abundance, we kind of forget how great it is. And it is a wonderful thing, the hope and the love that we have in Christ. But a lot of the people, as we've been talking about this whole year, trying to help others be saved, a lot of people don't have these things. They don't have these things. That's why they're searching out in other ways. But they need to find Christ. He's the one that truly fulfills the belief and the hope and the love that they're seeking. And so, Paul, I'm going to end with this kind of prayer of Paul's for the church in Ephesus. I think it really is a prayer that probably is said for all Christians. He said, "For this reason I bow my knees to the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, from whom the whole family in heaven and earth is named, that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with might through his Spirit in the inner man, that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the width and length and depth and height, to know the love of Christ, which passes knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God." That's what I think the promises of these gifts are. To be filled with belief and faith, to be filled with hope, and to be filled with love, is to fully be filled with the goodness and grace of God.